Okay, on this video, I'm going to talk about, so there are going to be 3 videos talking about the basics of Python. Okay, this will be a refresher if you've had Python before, or this may be new information for you. Okay, but it's assumed that you know at least some programming language. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about in a new language is going to be variables. Okay, so for the variables in Python, they're a little bit different than what we've seen in C++. The first thing being is that Python is not a strongly typed language. Okay, so put a comment here. It's not strongly typed. Okay, which means I can do things like this. I could say x is equal to 5. Okay, and then if I were to print, and the print is just there's no cout, we just print. I can print the type of x. Okay, then if I run this, I'm in PyCharm. It shows me here that the class here is an integer. Okay, if I were to change this to Bob and run the same thing, you'll see the type is now str or string. Okay, so and you can change it back and forth. I guess I didn't change it back and forth. If I would do x equal to 5 and then x equal to Bob, it's perfectly okay with it. Okay, so there's no issues at all with how that would work. At this, in fact, I could do a print here. And what we'll see is the first time we hit it, x is of class integer. Okay, the second time it's of type string. Okay, so it's going to change as whatever we put in it changes. Okay, but that being said, one of my golden rules for living, just because you can doesn't mean you should. There's not normally a reason to change back and forth between types randomly. Okay, so you want a reason. So again, it could also be, in this case, it would take it as a float. Okay, so just keep that in mind as we're going through things. Okay, as far as the scoping of variable goes, variables, again, this is unlike C++. Variables are in scope within the function they are called in. Okay, so it's a function level thing. So before, if we had something like, and I'm using things we haven't talked about quite yet, but if you had like, I don't know, 4x in range 10, okay, and then in here you're setting a variable c is equal to 1. Okay, and now we're back out. So again, in Python, another difference is the spacing determines where we're at. Okay, if we were in C at this point, or C++, then the variable c would be out of scope. Okay, it wouldn't have a value. But we see that we're fine. There's no issue at all. Okay, so since we have defined no functions, then the scope is universal. There's a global scope. It could be anywhere. Okay, so you have to keep that in mind in your programs. Things are not trapped inside of for loops or while loops like they would be in C++. So you can't assume that's the case. Okay, so you need to reset values again if you're going to use them again. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about functions. I'll do more function stuff later, but it's common practice in Python, and again, this mirrors a little bit C++, to have a main function. You don't have to. I've just been going without it. But to do that, and again, I'll talk about functions later, def defines a function, main takes no parameters, the colon will determine that we're starting a structure here. Okay, so now I can just do my program here, do a hello world, easy enough. Okay, and then don't forget the last thing you have to do somewhere in your program is to call that program. Okay, if I run this now, I get my hello world, prints out just fine. Okay, so you can define as many functions as you want. They can have parameters. We'll talk about that later. Okay, but just keep in mind that if you have 2 functions, okay, so if I'm going to do def f1, where I define a variable c is equal to 1, and then do a def F2 where I want to print C. Okay. You see that I get a little squiggly there. It's not showing me the issue, but it may catch. I'm not calling this, it may not catch it. Yeah, it doesn't call it, so it'll catch it. But if I would call, for example, F2 up here, okay, it's going to give me an error. Okay, C is not defined. Okay, so we can't assume because it's in one, it's going to be in the other. Okay. If you want a global variable, you could do global variables outside of everything. And again, I would just do a capital letter because that's what it's done in other languages. You don't have to, but we don't have to in C++. But by making it all caps, you denoted that as a global constant. And if it's not I guess if it's not a global constant, you can just define it here. Okay. And that would be fine. And that would fix your problem. Okay. So that's what we have to do as far as the scoping goes. Okay. So let's talk a little bit now about the input and the output functions. Okay. We've seen the print already. Okay, which is basic enough. You're just going to put, now note that when you type in print in PyCharm, it gives us some useful options here. The sep and the end in particular are useful. Okay, so we typically can print either a string, okay, or if we have a variable that's a string, you can have a variable that's an int. Okay, then we can print comma delimit, okay, C there. Okay, we be able to do that. We get the hello Bob. Note that unlike in C++, you don't have to put the space. It'll automatically, the comma puts the space by default. Okay, but again, that's where the sep equals. So if you set the separator equal to a colon, for example, okay, then if I run it, you see that it puts the colon as the separator. Okay. The other thing that you can do there, as long as we're doing this here, we can do an end equal. By default, it's new line character. If you just do a space, for example, okay, and then I print something else, whatever, okay, what you'll find is that it does not put a new line, okay, because I redefined it. So those are the two options that you can do from there, okay. The other thing that's pretty helpful, I think, is that there is a print F option, kind of like the print F in C++, and then I can just do hello, and then I can get the value of a variable in curly brackets. And I don't have to worry about doing the semicolons or any of those things. Okay, so by doing that, you can get that's the first one. Let's skip that one for now. You could say, you know, hello Bob, you are number 5. Okay, so by putting this, you know, and we can do other things here. We can do, you know, an expression. Just going to evaluate that. We can do an x mod 2. Okay, and then we get x mod 2 is 1. Okay, so because x that's a modular operator, x mod 2, 5 mod 2 is 1. Okay, so this printf is going to be pretty useful, as well as the sep and the end. Okay, and then the only other thing for this video is to allow the user to do an input. Okay, so if you've done earlier versions of Python, there used to be an input which tries to do a type conversion, and a raw input which sends it directly to a string. Okay, in Python 3, which is what we're in, we don't have that issue. Okay, so instead we just do an input. So we can say x is equal to input, and then you put the prompt right in here. Enter a number. Go ahead and put a colon space there. Okay. So now when I run this, you see it's going to ask me to enter a number. I enter a 5. Gives me an error. What doesn't it like? Oh, here's what it doesn't like. It doesn't like that this, and this is a good point. I'm glad I did that. It's a type error here because I have made that a string. This is now a string. Okay. So if you want it to be an integer, I could do this in 2 steps. I could say x is equal to int is a typecast x. Okay. And this should work. If I enter a number 5, we do that. Okay. Although it took it as a 1, which is interesting. Oh, because I'm doing the mod. There we go. Read your own code. Yeah. So that's why it's giving a 1. So that works okay. Okay. But I can also, and here's the preferred way to do it. I can just go ahead and do my cast to int right there. Okay. So I do that in one line, forcing it to be an integer. Okay. So if I enter 12, it's going to return 0 because that is an even number. Okay. Note that we're not checking to see if this is really a number or not, which we would need to do. So if I enter some letters there, note it's going to give me a value error. Okay. And we can have an exception to handle that, but we're not going to worry about that quite yet. Okay. Note you could also do a float here. Okay, so run that. And then it's going to print out the number itself. Okay. Again, if you just enter 4, it's going to convert that to a 4.0. Or if I enter the decimals, that's going to be fine. Okay. So this first video, all we talked about are variables, how they're scoped with the function that they're in, how we can declare global variables outside of the functions. We talked about the type function, which will return the type of a variable. If you need to know that, need to print that out or whatever. Okay. We talked about input using the input function. Okay. And how we have to cast that to the type of variable that we want. And then we talked about output during the print with the sep for the separator, and the end for what happens at the end of the print line, and then also the printf, which allows us to evaluate expressions inside of our print statement. As well, we talked about using a main function just as a way to organize things. It's a good idea. And then also, while we're at it, the octothorpe or the hashtag or the pound sign or whatever is for comments. Okay, and again, your program should have comments. You can also comment within a line. So comments wherever you want. Okay. So that ends the first video here. The next video, we'll talk about selective execution of our code.